The wind howled through the lonely hills that night, carrying with it the kind of cold that seeps deep into the bones and makes even the strongest soul shiver. Snow fell relentlessly, blanketing everything in sight with thick sheets of white. It was the kind of storm that could trap cars on the highway, collapse roofs, and leave people stranded in the middle of nowhere. On that night, somewhere at the edge of a quiet countryside road, an old woman named Margaret sat by her flickering fireplace in a small, weather-beaten cottage, unaware that destiny was about to knock on her door in the most unexpected way. If this story touches your heart at any moment, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner Deo. Every click helps us share more stories of hope and humanity that the world needs to hear. Margaret was 73, a widow for nearly a decade, and someone most neighbors described as too kind for this world. She lived alone in the cottage her husband had built with his bare hands 50 years earlier, surrounded by nothing but the memory of love, a few photo albums, and a stubborn old cat named Chester. Life for her was simple, though often lonely. She had grown used to her own silence, the creak of wooden floors, and the sound of snow tapping against her window during endless winters. But that night, silence broke with the growl of engines. At first, it was faint, muffled by the storm, but soon it grew louder, 15 motorcycles cutting through the blizzard, headlights piercing the wall of white. Margaret squinted through her frosted window and saw them, figures clad in leather, helmets pulled low, their heavy bikes crawling up her narrow driveway like beasts from a different world. For a moment, fear gripped her heart. 15 bikers, in the dead of night, in the middle of a snowstorm. She had read enough stories to know how that could end. Still, when the knock came, loud, desperate, echoing against her fragile door, her heart made the decision before her mind could. With trembling hands, she opened it. Snow gusted inside, clinging to boots and jackets as 15 towering men, exhausted and shivering, stood before her like shadows brought to life. Their beards were frozen, faces chapped from the cold, and their eyes carried a silent plea, "Help us." Margaret's instincts overcame her fear. Without hesitation, she stepped aside. "Come in," she whispered, her voice cracking from both nerves and compassion. And so they did, 15 bikers stomping snow from their boots, filling her tiny living room with the smell of leather, gasoline, and winter's fury. Her cottage, which usually felt too big for one, now seemed impossibly small. But Margaret didn't complain. She fetched blankets, rummaged through cupboards, pulled out every loaf of bread, every jar of soup, every pot of tea she could find. She worked tirelessly, her frail body moving faster than it had in years, driven by nothing more than kindness. The men, hardened by roads and battles life had thrown at them, watched her in stunned silence. No one had expected an old woman, living alone, to throw open her home like this, not for strangers, not for bikers the world often judged as rough or dangerous. As the night stretched on, the storm only worsened. Snow piled higher against the windows, winds rattled the roof, but inside, something extraordinary was happening. The bikers, usually loud and tough, spoke in hushed tones, respecting the fragile peace of the cottage. One of them mended the fire, another helped wash dishes, while the rest listened quietly as Margaret told stories of her late husband, her years of teaching children at the village school, and the loneliness winters often brought her. What amazed her most wasn't the chaos they brought but the gentleness they revealed. One of the bikers took a chair beside her and asked about the wedding photo framed above her fireplace. Another offered to shovel snow off her porch when the storm cleared. A third, the youngest of them, simply said, "Ma'am, I don't know what we'd have done tonight without you." And for the first time in many years, Margaret felt her cottage alive again, filled with warmth not just from the fire, but from laughter, gratitude, and the company of souls who had once been strangers. By morning, the storm had finally calmed. The bikers prepared to leave, bundling themselves back into the cold, thanking Margaret over and over again for what she had done. She stood by the door, waving as they disappeared down the road, their engines echoing into the hills. She thought that was the end of it, that her act of kindness had simply saved a few men from a frozen night. she couldn't have been more wrong. Because the next morning, when Margaret opened her door to feed Chester, she froze in disbelief. Parked neatly along her narrow road, stretching far beyond what her eyes could count, were motorcycles, dozens, then more, until she realized what she was seeing. Not 15. Not 20. But 100 gleaming bikes lined up outside her home. Her heart raced as tears blurred her vision. The riders had come back, not just those 15 men, but dozens more, all members of their brotherhood, drawn by the story of one old woman who opened her door when no one else would. They stood there, waiting in the snow, helmets under arms, eyes full of respect. And then the leader of the group stepped forward and placed a leather jacket in her hands, the back stitched with their emblem and 3 words, "Family for Life." Margaret clutched the jacket to her chest as sobs shook her small frame. She had spent years thinking the world had forgotten her, that kindness was a seed planted in soil too cold to bloom. But here she stood, surrounded by 100 men who had come to say otherwise. From that day on, she was no longer alone. Every winter, bikers stopped by to check on her. Every summer, her home became a gathering place, her porch filled with laughter, engines roaring down the road like a promise she was forever loved. And all because, on one stormy night, she had chosen kindness over fear. If this story made you feel the power of love and compassion, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner Deo so we can keep spreading stories that remind us of the goodness still left in the world. And before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Would you have opened your door to those bikers that night? Comment below, we can't wait to read your thoughts.